You know, for as many flaws Sword and Shield had, I liked them for what they were. Honestly, for all of its controversy, I don't think Gen 8 was all too bad. It had a lot of great spin-off games, and Pokemon Legends Arceus was pretty good. That being said though, finally all that controversy's in the past, because today we're talking about the first truly open-world Pokemon game, Scarlet and Violet. The idea of a fully explorable region and seeing the Pokemon all naturally interacting with their environment was something I've always wanted. Legends Arceus was sort of doing that, but it wasn't actually open world at all. And from what we saw from Scarlet and Violet's trailers, it seemed like this would finally be the one to do that for me. Without getting too ahead of myself though, Scarlet and Violet doesn't completely achieve that, but for Game Freak's first shot at an open world game, it was a pretty great first try. Honestly, despite its issues, this is probably my favorite game in the series. However, it's also because of my love for this game that these problems stick out to me on a personal level far more than they otherwise probably would. So without further ado, let's talk about why that is exactly with the Violet version of the game. Not because of any of the version-exclusive Pokemon, but more because I prefer purplish colors to red, and quite frankly, this man's jawline just speaks to me. Welcome to the Spade-inspired Paldea region, home to the prestigious Uva Academy, and now, you the player. This time around, instead of just choosing a face portrait and the game sending you off, you get to pick one as a point for customizing your character right at the start. Honestly, character customization is just alright this time around. I wish there were some more guy hair options, and I also wish I could customize the clothing more, but it is what it is, I suppose. As for the starters this time around, I have to say, I think this is probably one of the strongest sets we've had in a while. Their first and final forms all look great, and while I can only speak for my Sprigatito, whom I named Drillmark,
Flora heals an aching soul.
from what I've seen, they're all pretty strong. Heck, Sprigatito's evolution, Meowscarada, is actually the current fastest starter in this series, with a base speed stat of 123, and a pretty nice physical attack to complement it. Also, its signature move, Flower Trick, might actually be the scariest physical grass move I've seen. It's 70 base power, can't miss, and always crits. Point being, you wouldn't really go wrong using any of these guys, since they're all pretty good, and frankly, the entire regional dex is just as great. As an example, within the first hour, you can easily have caught at least 15 entirely different Pokemon to use, and that's just the first area. The variety of new and returning Pokemon this time around is pretty great. Sure, maybe a couple of the new ones were a bit weaker than others, but none of them were bad at all. Honestly, the 100 plus new Pokemon Gen 9 introduces are all really good, and without going too deep into it, have some of my favorite new designs in the series, like with all the new starters. By the way, as a very important side note, can we stop for a moment to appreciate that they finally fixed the tutorials? Seriously, it took them way longer than it should have to change this. There's no hand-holding of any kind. It hits quickly with the info you need and lets you get right to it. There's no long drawn-out capture sequence here. I knew I was gonna love this game the second I realized they fixed this, because I absolutely loathe super hand-holdy tutorials. Honestly, it's gonna be kinda hard to go back to older Pokemon games after this. Making this even harder, though, is the addition of your new best friend in bioorganic eco-friendly transportation, Miraidon or Koraidon. These guys are all of the Ride Pokemon from Legends rolled into one, and I absolutely love them. These guys are easily the best box legendaries. They make a fantastic first impression, and while you can't use them in combat until after you've beaten the game, you have them for so long as your ride that it helps to build a naturally very strong bond with the player that no other legendary has accomplished for me. The game's open world combined with your superpowered ride makes exploration in Scarlet and Violet the most fun it's ever been for the series. Finding new Pokemon and items has never been more fun for me. On the subject of items and exploration though, I do kinda like the addition of craftable TMs for the game. Instead of them being permanent, you can craft them with the parts you get from Pokemon you've caught or beaten, and the league points you can earn. You can also expand your list of craftable TMs by finding or receiving new ones. That being said though, during a casual playthrough, you probably won't be crafting that many at all, and with how generous the game is with the items you can find, I don't have much to do with my spare materials or league points. As a fun little side note, I kinda like the picnic mechanic. It's not much, but it's kinda fun to camp out and make sandwiches for the team, especially since it gives some great bonuses, like increased type EXP and egg chances. All of that being said, however, the open world aspect of the game isn't perfect. Aside from the main adventure, there's not much in the way of side content aside from the few optional legendaries and the Terra raids. The Terra raids are an improved version of Sword and Shield's Dynamax raids. Dotted around the world are various crystal caves that all have a Pokemon with a different Terra type, more on that later, than they would otherwise normally have. I never played any of these, or even the game as a whole in multiplayer, so I can't speak for how well that works, but even with just NPCs, the raids were actually a lot of fun. Unlike in the previous raids, combat works in real time, and you can even give a few different cheers to buff the team. These actually give some pretty good rewards, like XP candies, materials, and items you can sell for money. So even if you don't want to catch the Pokemon in the den, it'll still be worth doing for the stuff you get. The only other thing besides that is the classes you can take at the Academy. These are here to teach the player about other things involving combat, or in the case with History class, teaching you some very interesting lore about the region. Every class has a midterm and final exam that rewards you with some EXP candies when you passed, so while it's not much, it does give alright enough rewards. For a future open world game, I would love for there to be side quests like in Legends Arceus. It would be a perfect way to do more with other characters like the gym leaders while also adding in extra things for the player to do. On the subject of issues though, let's talk about the first of the game's two largest issues that, frankly, I'm sure you've noticed by this point, the game's performance. So, on a completely personal level, issues like these don't usually bother me. Unless a game is crashing on me or is impacting gameplay in a majorly negative way, I don't really care, because my tolerance for issues like these is probably far higher than it has any right to be. That being said though, I have no idea what executive up at the top forced this game out the door, but it should not have been shipped in the state it's in. General frame drops are constant, poppin' is a consistent issue, any NPC more than 10 to 12 feet away from you suddenly devolves into bad stop-motion animation, and the lighting isn't actually all that bad, but it could have used a little bit of work. Normally with things like this, I just point it out, criticize it, and move on, but this time it's different. This time, I'm mad at whoever or whatever group of people in management denied this game a delay because I'm confident this issue, and the second largest issue we'll get to later, only exist because this game didn't get the time it needed. There is so much love and heart put into so many aspects of this game, especially in its story, and seeing a problem exist in the game that was so easily preventable by just getting more help or delaying it frustrates me to no end. With any luck though, the unanimous criticism this has gotten will convince the higher-ups to give their developers more time on future games. Given that the game is an open world, Scarlet and Violet handle its adventure in a very different way than the past entries. During Uva Academy's treasure hunt, you're allowed to leave the Academy to pursue your own goals to find your own treasure, may it be metaphorical or literal. On your journey to find that treasure though, you'll have 3 different stories to tackle, each with their own unique gameplay styles. Victory Road is about what you'd expect from a normal Pokemon game. This is your typical collect all 8 gym badges story with a bit of a twist I won't get into here. The Path of Legends involves you helping another student named Arvin collect a set of 5 plants called the Herba Mystica from the powerful Titan Pokemon scattered across the region. Finally, Starfall Street involves the villain group of the game, Team Star, where your goal is to topple their group under the request of a mysterious person named Cassiopeia by raiding their 5 bases. The gyms give you your usual badges that raise the level cap for Pokemon obeying you, and while the other 2 paths also give badges, they come with very different rewards. Beating a Titan Pokemon will upgrade your Miraidon or Koraidon with new movement abilities to help with traversal. Taking down Team Star bases will net you new TMs as well as the league points and materials needed to craft some of them. The only problem with the TMs they give you is that I'm not actually sure what I'm getting. They don't tell you specifically, so you pretty much just have to look at your craftables list and see if anything jumps out at you as new. In terms of what you'll be doing during these 3 stories though, let's start with the gyms per usual for Pokemon. As I said before, there's 8 gyms to go through, each one specializing in a different type. All 8 gyms have a different test you'll have to complete to challenge the gym leader, and for the most part, I enjoyed all of them. My favorite had to go to the Ghost-type gyms. Sure, it's nothing special since all you're doing is just a few double battles to power the stage, but double battles are something the series doesn't really use enough in my opinion though, and having another gym utilize them so soon after Gen 8 was a very welcome surprise. The one I liked the least, though, was Alpha Nada's gym challenge. It wasn't bad by any means, it's just that after the first round of this Simon Says-esque minigame, it got a little boring. As for the gym leaders themselves, though, I really liked all of them. Just like Black and White, all of the gym leaders have jobs outside of the challenge, and these were details I really liked. Sure, it's only a little thing, but I think it adds a lot to their personality and character, and it was great to see this come back. The gym battles themselves, though, are actually kind of interesting thanks to Gen 9's new terastallizing mechanic. In battle, when your Terra Orb is charged, you can terastallize your Pokemon into their Terra type, which can be any of the 18 types. If a Pokemon terastallizes into the type they already are, their same type attack bonus goes from 1.5 extra damage to 2 times extra damage. If they change into a different type altogether, then their Terra type becomes a new type bonus along with any type bonuses they had before. Similar to Z moves, you can only use it once per fight. Unlike Z moves though, you'll have to stop by a Pokemon Center to recharge your Terra Orb. As for my thoughts on the mechanic itself, I really like it, and yes, this does include the little hats they get. Because of how terastallizing works, it adds a good bit of strategy to fights, and it never really felt as overpowered as past gimmicks were, and thanks to how well they're implemented into gym fights and the various raids, it never felt underutilized. Shifting focus to the Path of Legends though, this is a lot more simple, since here you'll be searching for the 5 titans scattered around Paldea to claim their Herba Mystica. Finding them isn't really hard at all, but the battles themselves are pretty fun. Each Titan has 2 phases, one where you fight them by yourself and one where you fight a powered up version of them with Arven. I think the only thing I would have added to them is in their second phase, they call in for their own companion to help them fight you off, similarly to the totem Pokemon in Sun and Moon. Finally, we have the Team Star bases, and these are pretty different. Here you'll be raiding each of their bases by utilizing the game's auto battle mechanic to fight off 30 of Team Star's grunts. The auto battle mechanic in the field allows you to quickly gather materials by sending out Pokemon to walk with you and having them attack other nearby Pokemon. Them winning, however, is determined based on things like their type and even moveset, so it's not exactly guaranteed even if something is lower level than it. Like I mentioned before though, in the Team Star bases you'll be trying to beat 30 of their grunts Pokemon, but you'll have access to only the first 3 guys in your party, and you'll have 10 minutes to meet your goal. It's not exactly hard though, so you'll never need to stress yourself out over it, especially since you heal at their vending machines for free. The Team Star bosses are where things get a bit more engaging though. After beating their main team, you'll be fighting their giant Reverum-powered car as a unique Pokemon, with each one having their own unique signature move and a different ability. While I do wish each car looked a bit different in ways that isn't just their paint job, these were really cool. Because they were all somewhat unique from one another, I didn't totally know what to expect from them, and they made for some really great fights. Also, side note, the music for these is super good. Honestly, whatever they're paying the composers is absolutely not enough, because this soundtrack might be the best one in the entire series. All that being said though, this is where we get into the second biggest issue with Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Despite the game saying you can do any objective in any order, it's not totally built for this idea. You absolutely can do any objective at any point you want, but because the strength of the gym or bosses doesn't change at all, it makes actually doing just that pretty difficult to do. To me, when you think about the game's main selling point and design philosophy, this issue becomes pretty glaring, to the point where I refuse to believe no one on the dev team didn't notice this. My best guess is that they wanted to include it but just didn't have the time to do so. Honestly, it's a shame the game suffers from this problem, because even though I'm absolutely going to play this game more in the very near future, this edition would have not only worked perfectly for the kind of game Scarlet and Violet is trying to be, but it would have also added a lot of extra replay value. That being said though, at this point, those of you who haven't played the game yet or straight up haven't beaten it are probably confused why Scarlet and Violet is my favorite game in the series. The answer is simple: the story and its characters. This will definitely surprise you since Pokemon isn't exactly known for its storytelling, but this time around the writers sat down and actually gave it their best shot at creating something both engaging and pretty well written. So skip to here if you want to avoid spoilers, and for once on this channel I feel you absolutely should. If you haven't played the game yet and you're interested, you need to experience Pokemon actually trying to tell a really good story yourself, because let me tell you, it's a heck of a trip. That being said though, let's discuss what is easily the best story in the series since Gen 5, and what is, quite frankly, its best story yet. So let me start this off by saying that Nemona is the best rival in the series since N. Honestly, calling her a rival doesn't exactly feel right, because a rival implies you two are competing to be better than the other. The thing is, Nemona holds back against you the entire game, because she's actually stronger than the league's champion Gita. Heck, anytime she fights you, she actually makes an effort to scale down her team, because otherwise she would pound you into the floor since she'd be too strong to beat. This is a problem for her, because in many ways she's like a Latin version of Goku, but instead of Ki and Saiyan powers, she has Pokemon and apparently a terrible aim. This is why she sort of takes the role of a mentor for you, the player, in the hope she can raise you up and bring out your inner potential to hopefully be able to take her on at her best. This is the big reason she chooses to use the starter weak to yours. The entire idea is she's trying to give you an advantage to help give you a better chance. She's not a complex character like N, but for me she's just as good as he is. Also completely unrelated, but does anyone else think Nemona has a thing for the player character? Like, she follows you to other gyms, she tries pretty hard to get buddy-buddy with someone she met only an hour prior, and she's even a little possessive of you? Maybe I'm just reading too much into this, but I feel like it might have been love at first fight with this one. My only problem with the gym story is the Pokemon League, and it's not because of their characters at all. Gita herself is just fine, but I really like the Elite Four. Rika's pretty cool, and her design just does things for me. And Poppy being an Elite Four member at the age of, like, 5 and a user of Steel types is both hilarious and incredibly impressive. Larry being both a gym leader, Elite Four member, and having some other unknown job gives me great respect for this man, and makes me really hope he gets paid what he deserves, because this man is pulling a triple shift right now. Hassel's pretty great too, and seeing him early on in the challenge was a nice surprise, since these games don't usually do much with the Elite Four. My actual problem here is the fact that the Elite Four specializing in a single type feels a bit redundant here. Thanks to every type having a representative boss or titan prior to this point, my thinking was that the Elite Four would work more like the champion and have their teams be more thematically related to their character than be based on one type. But no, they did what they normally do with them, and that's a little bit disappointing for me. Like, could they not have at least specialized in 2 types instead of just 1? Also, Gita's choice of an ace is very odd. Her Glamora has an ability that lets it set up toxic spikes without using a move, so I feel it would have made way more sense for her to open with that and maybe make her King Gambit her ace instead. My least favorite story goes to Starfall Street. It's not bad at all, it's just a bit weaker than the other 2 stories. The bosses of Team Star are all really nice characters, and Penny might be one of my favorite evil team leaders. I just feel it needed a bit more focus for me is all. The Path of Legends though, now this is the best of the 3. Arvin's story is simple but incredibly relatable. He just wants to heal his injured dog using the power of the Herba Mystica. At first, my motivation for these was just upgrading my ride. Then I saw this poor injured big fluffy baby, and my inner dog lover was like, we shall stop at nothing to heal this big ol' Pokédoggo. Honestly, that scene after the final Titan where Mabostiff finally gets fully better actually made me tear up a little. As someone with a dog themselves, this story really just clicked with me in a big way. I really loved this. Then we get to the end of the game, and let me tell ya, before playing through this part, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet were in my top 5 or top 3. I hadn't fully decided at the time. After this section though, it shot straight to the top of my list, because this final act is actually incredible. The second you enter Area 0, you can already tell something's not quite right here, thanks to its very alien-sounding music and the lack of any kind of people. This place was being researched, so what happened to the others? This is also a great section of the game for our main characters here, since we do get a lot of great conversations between them. And as a quick criticism, this was the point where I really felt the game needed voice acting. It was kinda hard to pay attention to what they were saying, while also trying not to run into any of the wildlife. Also, there are just some moments in the earlier parts of the game and in the finale that would have hit the littlest bit harder if it had it. Aside from that though, I have no other criticism for this final part. It's super well made. Starting with the big new Pokemon type you're introduced to, I love the Paradox Pokemon. They differ greatly depending on the version you're playing, and since I'm playing Violet, I get a whole squad of what I think are either robots or cyborgs that lean very hard on the machine side of things. I've heard some people say that the fact that the future Paradox Pokemon are all robots is boring, and while I can sort of understand that opinion, I personally am okay with it, because robots and cyborgs are the coolest. That being said though, I can't defend Iron Jegulus. It's literally just Hydreigon, but chrome. The absolute best part to Area Zero, though, is when you finally make it to Lab Zero after dealing with a horde of Paradox Pokemon, and for the first time in the game, you finally meet the professor in person, only to then find out you're talking to an AI-controlled robot version of them, and that the actual professor and one of Arven's parents kicked it before the start of the game, and they've been dead for a while. As it turns out, though, the original professor was responsible for the Paradox Pokemon situation, thanks to the time machine they built using the Terra Crystals. Basically, they built this thing to send Master Balls into either the past or future and bring them back for research, but for some reason they thought it would be a great idea to program the system to run on an infinite loop of catching and pulling Pokemon into the present. Eventually, this would lead to the ecological destruction of Paldea, since the Paradox Pokemon are far more powerful than most modern-day Pokemon. To stop this, the AI professor asks you, the player, to turn off the machine since they're programmed to be unable to. To do that, you gotta go through them in the series' first version-exclusive final boss battle. Also, this final boss theme is genuinely incredible. After finishing this fight, I couldn't help but listen to this on loop for like half an hour. This entire section also made me feel really bad for Arven. One of his parents is nowhere to be found, and the one parent he did have was absent for most of his life and died before they could have potentially made amends. Also, literally the only family he actually still functionally has is a dog. I mean, he now has an incredible group of friends, but here's to hoping in Scarlet and Violet's inevitable DLC, Arven gets a big win of some kind, because the boy needs one. This entire final act is wonderful, and easily made this the #1 game in the series for me. It lets the entire main cast shine in a great way, and the final battle and twists with the professor are great. I was also pretty surprised by the lack of some third legendary at the bottom of Area Zero, because I was pretty sure that's where the story was going early on. I mean, really think about this here for a moment. We have a massive collection of crystals that allow Pokemon to change type, make advanced, sophisticated AIs like the Professor's possible, are seemingly the reason the Herba Mystica exist, and allow for time travel. Heck, knowing that the Professors were the one who made the time machine, this makes the Explorer Heath's Scarlet and Violet book very interesting, since they were written a long time ago. So him seeing a Paradox Pokemon would mean that the crystals occasionally just bring Pokemon from the past or future into the present on their own. Look, all I'm saying is that whatever is behind these crystals will absolutely be relevant in the DLC, and whatever it ends up being, much like the story as a whole, is definitely not what I was expecting going into this game. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are far from perfect. The lack of your main objective scaling in a game like this is a very glaring issue, and the performance issues, while definitely not anything game-breaking, are absolutely unacceptable. I'm sure there's also a number of little problems I just didn't even address in this review for one reason or another, but despite all of that, this game is genuinely great. The new Pokemon are all really good, and I think Gen 9 has one of the strongest sets of starters in the series, with a fantastic variety of Pokemon and the regional decks to complement that. The gym challenge we do have here is one of my favorites, and Nemona is a wonderful rival. And the other story paths are just as fun for me, and frankly the story as a whole is just great, which is not something you typically hear about a Pokemon game. The open world aspect of the game definitely still has a lot of potential, and with the amount of love I've seen in Scarlet and Violet, I'm sure future games in the series will refine and improve on what they did here to make something even better. But they can't do that without enough time, and maybe even help, so hopefully this game will be a lesson to whatever higher-ups are responsible for the short development cycle of these games. Greatness can't be rushed, and good games sometimes just take a lot of time to make. And hey, with this game having sold 10 million copies in 3 days, which even for a Pokemon game is absolutely insane, hopefully this will get the dev team more time to polish up future Pokemon games. But hey, at the very least, this new generation of Pokemon is looking pretty good, and I can't wait to see what's next for the series. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.